and then we'll get started. Welcome, one and all, to Object Podcast, a show featuring members of the GameMaker community. My name is Lazy Eye, and I'm thrilled to welcome us all to the first official episode of the podcast. Today, I'm joined by our hosts, Maseda and Seabass, and our guest, Shaun Spalding. If you've been involved in GameMaker before, be it using the engine or just participating in the community, you've probably come across Shaun in one way or the other. Known for his active participation in game jams, his original game titled Another Perspective, and of course, his expansive YouTube channel, which is responsible for teaching many GameMaker developers, Shaun is a critical member of our community, and we're thrilled to have him on as our guest. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Hello! Gosh, that was a fancy intro.
I tried very hard. I spent many hours writing that.
Yes.
Alright, to our viewers who are joining us live right now in the r/GameMaker Discord, please feel free to share any questions you may have for Shaun or us in the chat. I'll be collecting them as we go, and we'll ask a handful of them towards the end of our show. And before I pass off the torch to Maseda and Seabass, I'll kick us off with a question for Shaun. Shaun, there is often a debate between more technically oriented developers and design-oriented developers about which is more important. Making sure that your code is using the best methods possible, or simply just using code that works for you and gets the job done. What is your outlook on this when writing code, and has it played an influence into the code that you write for your tutorials?
Gosh, okay.
So start with the easy questions.
Yeah. I mean,
oh yeah.
It kind of is the easy question. I mean, people, I think a lot of us kind of share the same advice that we give to people when they ask about this kind of thing. And when people come looking for help with stuff and they ask us like, oh, what's the most efficient way to do this or that or the other? And the answer is always to not worry about that and, you know, just worry about making the thing work in the first place. That's always kind of been, well, I say it's not always been my philosophy at all. It's my philosophy now, but it is something I've struggled a lot with developing games where when you get started and stuff and you're making things for the first time, you want to make sure you're getting things right, you know? And when you read a lot of information on coding and games dev stuff, you can't get away from all of the pressures everywhere in forums and advice on Stack Overflows or whatever you're reading, of people telling you, oh, you could do this and it would be faster, and this is more efficient, or you shouldn't do it this way because of this, and so on. And so you're trying to like build up sort of this collection of all these rules of how you have to write stuff. But as I say, a lot of it's kind of nonsense. It takes a long time to really learn that it doesn't matter. I think it takes a long time to get to the point where you realize that if you can make something work, that has value. And it's always a really tough thing, because like obviously it matters that you write code that's going to function long term, and it matters that you can write stuff that is going to work effectively. But there's always that, it's a really fine line a fine rope to kind of balance across.
Yeah, I guess it matters, but doesn't matter yet.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the code you write, you end up throwing away anyway. So, you know, why go to the lengths of making it super optimized and delete it later?
The main problem with this is that you don't know what you don't know. So you can only write stuff in the best way that you know how to write it. And I think a lot of people, and myself included, as I grew as a developer, worry too much about the fact that this could probably be done better, or like there might be a way, or like there's a way in the back of your head that you don't really know how to do, that this would be like a bit better or a bit faster. And you can spend so much time doing that you don't get the thing done at all.
I suppose that's why jams are so great, because you have a limited amount of time to build this game. So you could spend all of that time optimizing this one function, or just get on with it.
Yeah, and you do. As I say, you do get on with it because you have to. But on the flip side of that as well, like you spend all your time doing jams, you do still need to be able to learn those things. But you automatically do. I think you don't have to worry about it in order to learn how to optimize. because I think you will naturally come across those things, and you'll naturally always have people, because people love to point it out. Like, oh, hey, you could do this better if you're sharing your code, if you want to. You'll learn that stuff.
Definitely a culprit of that on the help channels.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You'll learn that stuff, and I think like you just don't have to stress yourself out about it as much. And I think, you really just have to get whatever you're working on working first, and you can always go back and optimize later.
Have you ever ran into a point in any projects where you're, because I'm right with you on the that method of programming, because you're right, it's silly to put like 6 hours into something that you only need to put 10 minutes into.
Yeah.
Have you ever ran into a point in a project where you later on were like, oh crap, we don't have enough headroom?
Yes.
We're actually joking.
yeah, absolutely. And you might think that just contradicts what I say, like, oh, you can always go back and optimize, and sometimes you run into a situation where that means, oh, actually, you've got to restart your entire project,
Yeah.
But the thing is with that, and it goes back to what I just said before, you don't know what you don't know. There was no real way for you to avoid making that mistake. And so making that mistake just taught you that thing, and now you know that thing, and you can go forward, Yeah,
the next time you write it, you'll know this is something
exactly.
I have to write this way next time, because
exactly.
it will bite me.
So there's only so much you can do to try and predict what problems you're going to run into. Ultimately, you're going to run into problems with things that you didn't know existed, and problems you didn't know that you were going to have. So the only way to find out is to get in there and start making it. I think another thing as well with this is like a lot of people ask about like efficiency and optimization and stuff in my video tutorials and the stuff that I do. The work I always struggle with that as well, and finding that balance of I always try and wait until I know that something I'm going to teach people is like good and reliable. I don't like to teach methods that are obviously intrinsically flawed in some sort of really horrible backwards way. But I still think there's a lot of value in being able to show people how to get something working. And also on the other side of that is showing people code that's not necessarily optimal, but is easier to understand in like a lateral sense. Like you get the logic of how it flows much easier because just there's less lines of code in it, or just from the structure of the code you're using, it's easier to pick up. And so I feel that stuff can be better for teaching people, even if it isn't necessarily the most optimal way of doing it. Like, I know, like, people have tested, I don't know if this is still the case, like, the verdict on this seems to swing back and forth a lot, but, like, repeat versus for, or whatever, and how repeat is, like, faster, but, like, repeat doesn't make as much logical sense, like, to people to pick up as, like, a for thing. Oh, right, this increments every time, and I can use that, and so on, rather than having to do all that yourself and explain it all separately.
Yeah, the sentence logic behind repeat one makes you think, so this is going to run and then repeat once, right? You're like, no, of course not, no.
That's definitely a thing in programming in general, is code readability is very important. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, exactly. And so I always go for stuff that, even if I have to come back in a later episode of a series later and be like, okay, we're going to do this differently now because it wasn't the best way before, the reason I show the not best way in the first place is usually intentional, and it's usually because you weren't ready for some of the things we're doing later,
Yeah. Lazy Eye has brought up that a lot of really, I'll say, high-tier games in the GM community, like Undertale or Nuclear Throne, all kind of had really bad code bases. I recall a picture of Undertale's dialogue system, and it was a switch statement with, I believe, 1,000+ cases, and that's how he did the dialogue, which... Yeah, you wouldn't want the internet to know you did that. Yeah, but it totally worked, and no one had problems with it, and that's okay. I'll run this to the next question then, because this does kind of lead into it. When you're going through this whole cycle on a project, and you're going back and fixing things, or going back forward and, writing a new system, how do you avoid burnout on your projects?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because, like, I burn out often, so I guess I don't avoid burnout. It's a really hard one, because it's hard, like, how do you define burnout? How do you know when you've worked too hard? And this is a really tough thing, I think, for a lot of people, because they see people around them, and they see a lot of our culture suggesting that you have to really kind of be on the pedal all the time, and that if you're not stressed out and you're not like, especially when you see things like, I don't know, it's kind of an old cliche reference point at this point, but things like Indie Game the Movie and stuff where people are like, you know, like on the serious, like on the serious, like emotional duress and strain over the course of their projects, and you see that paired with the stories of success, and you start to equate that with success, and you're like, okay, so if I'm not feeling like trash because of this project, I'm not working hard enough, which is obviously awful, right?
Yeah.
So it's tough to like, how do I don't do anything specific to try and avoid burnout. I just avoid burnout, I guess. You know,
I
like
mean, do you take days off if you're not feeling it?
And that's an interesting thing, I guess, as well, because the work that I do on YouTube is very, you know, anyone doing anything on YouTube and trying to survive in YouTube's ecosystem, it's very anti burnout. You know, like
post daily or
yeah,
very often.
Yeah, exactly. And you're encouraged to put stuff out all the time, constantly. And I'm very lucky in that I've managed to kind of get away from that model, because now I'm mostly supported by Patreon. Very little of my income now comes from my ad revenue. We're getting to the point where, you know, a bit more support on Patreon, I can just drop the ads entirely, because it's not worth it anymore, and it's a negative part of my content, I feel.
Yeah, you get that Udemy guy.
Yeah, I can finally get rid of Udemy guy. But yeah, the thing with that is, like, because ads drive you to that kind of system drives you to kind of work in that way. Even though I now am mostly supported by Patreon, it's hard to get out of that mindset of like, I've got to be doing regular stuff, it's got to be out every week at this time, otherwise, you know, everything I do is going to fail. And it's not true. And like, I've been getting more and more comfortable with just saying to my supporters, you know what, this is probably going to take a little longer, I want to make sure it's good. Hey, I'm going to take this week off because I'm not feeling very well, I'm not feeling good on the weather. Hey, I'm going on holiday this week, and you know, that kind of thing. And actually just being able to take that time off and finding, like, you know, when I first started doing that stuff, I kind of expected some pushback, like seeing my patrons as like these like investors almost in my work, and being just like no, we're paying you for this work, you have to do other stuff. But they're not. They're amazing. They're awesome people. Like, anyone who decides to just give money to someone to support their creative stuff for next to no reward, really. Like, they get some. I give them some cool stuff. They get the source code, they get the credit, name of the credits, but they don't get anything of substance for the amount of money they're giving me. I'm not really, other than supporting what I do. That drives the point of those people are there because they are that invested in seeing more of my stuff continue to exist. And because of that, those people are very interested in my well-being, and they're interested in me being in a state where I'm able to produce stuff that's actually really good and is the kind of thing that they want. So they're actually super, super comfortable with me taking that time off and avoiding burnout and all that kind of thing. And it seems to be in there. They encourage me to do it. They encourage me. They say, like, you know, take all the time you need and make sure that the work you do is really good, because that's what we're here for at the end of the day. And that's why Patreon is awesome.
Yeah.
I think a lot of today's society just doesn't value mental health as much as it does physical health. If you broke your leg, you know, in a ski accident, you'd take some time off, right? You'd say, hey, you know, my leg's broken, I'm in hospital, I can't work on anything. Yeah. But if you are suffering burnout or some other mental breakdown, or, you know, just stress, you wouldn't, or I think most people wouldn't take the time off. They'll think, oh, you know, it's not that important, I try to power through this. But actually, your brain is arguably more important than your limbs, right? So why would you not take time off if you have, you know, some mental stress to deal with, when you would take time off when you had a fracture?
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, I think fortunately a lot of people in industry are wising up to this and sort of more aware of just mental health, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. It's worth bearing in mind as well that I'm saying this from a place of massive advantage. Like, as I say, I have these Patreon supporters who are amazing, and I've kind of escaped, essentially, that ecosystem of YouTube that if you don't keep pushing, you're swallowed by it, and you don't survive, and you don't get to succeed on that platform. So, like, yeah, I mean, essentially I'm just turning your positive, like, oh, this is cool, into a massive downer by saying that, yeah, it's just great for me. But as I say, well, for a lot of people, they're just like, they're not afforded this the opportunity to avoid burnout by the platforms themselves, and it's the platform holders who have this responsibility. And YouTube has the goal to come out with some of this stuff where they're like, oh yeah, we want you guys to really avoid burnout, and here are some top creator tips for it and stuff on the Creator Academy sections. And it's nonsense, because their algorithm hates you to not be working on stuff 24/7. Like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. That's kind of how it is, though, even outside YouTube. And this is kind of why it's a problem, is that it seems like if you're making games, if you're making YouTube content, if you're trying to even just run a Patreon, I've seen cosplayers that do stuff, you have to be posting all the time. If you're not working at least 6 days a week, you're at the norm, which is the non-succeeding branch. So you have to like consistently be in a bad state of mind to pull through, which is really bad. But yeah, it seems to be what it is now.
How normal is it to sort of bank up content to be released later?
I can only speak from my perspective, but like, for the most part with me, I love the idea of doing that, and it's very much I would if I could. But often, it takes that long to make the content in the first place, that by the time I've done it, it's, I need to get something out, kind of thing, know? So I don't really often get the opportunity to do it. So every now and again, I'll be able to whip out some quick things, and it's really, and I sometimes I have to in order to catch up with kind of like the system whereby like I offer my patrons like a week of early access to my videos and stuff like that, but like, I'm still also trying to keep a bit of this YouTube wheelhouse going, which I'm starting to care less and less about, because it just doesn't matter to me anymore, because I now have this this cool audience on Patreon. But like it's tough. It's a tough balance.
I actually have a content related question about your channel, and I've wondered this about a number of GM tutorial channels, so Heartbeats included. Do you avoid the more technical topics more so because people like to just fight about every technical question there is?
Not really. I avoid a lot of the more technical stuff because, in blunt honesty, I'm not that technical.
Right.
Like,
okay.
I teach what I know. I teach the things that I confidently know how to teach. I'm quite good at learning stuff. Like, that's a talent I have. I'm very good at picking up new tools and new things, new systems. So
right, with the shaders, yeah, I'm
well positioned to do the research and be able to put out a good video on a thing, and then I learn and grow as a developer as a result, and I love doing that kind of stuff. But as I say, like, I don't cover a lot of super advanced stuff, one, because I don't necessarily know it, or I'm not confident that my take on it is necessarily like super refined, super good for people, or secondly, as well, because there's not really an audience for it, nor not the same kind of audience that there is and demand that there is for beginner content.
Absolutely.
Not enough to sustain it in the sort of ad revenue kind of way. Luckily, I can do more of that kind of stuff now because, as I say, I'm supported by these people. But even my Patreon supporters, for the most part, are people who are interested in seeing more beginner stuff. Like, I do these topic polls and stuff a lot of, like, oh, what do you guys want me to work on? And a lot of the time, it's like, oh, just carry on with that beginner series you're doing on Platformer. That's great. That's why I came here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of reasons, it's just, it's my audience, and it's the people I'm reaching out to who are more interested in lower level stuff. Advanced stuff, the thing you find with advanced programmers is generally if they have a tough problem they're trying to solve, they try and work it out themselves, kind of thing. They
don't want your code.
Yeah.
It's the reinvent the wheel method for everything.
Yeah. So it tends to be that you get lots of little pieces of cool advanced stuff coming from lots of different people who've worked stuff out and have decided to share that with the community and so on. You get cool stuff like you've got the community GitHub and everything going on here, and people who do like assets and things like that. For more advanced, and again, like when you're doing more advanced and intermediate stuff, it tends to be of like take a lot more work going into it, so people tend to want to like sell it for stuff rather than what I like to do, which is provide just free educational content for people.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why it just naturally isn't a thing that lots of people cover. I don't think it's necessarily anomalous that like, oh, there's not that much advanced tutorial topic content out there. I think that's just a fairly natural consequence of like what people are looking for.
People want something they can apply to make a game with. Like, it's not helpful to know, like, oh, yeah, these data types work like this. Like, okay, well, that has nothing to do with making a platformer, so... Yeah, no, I agree. I see why that would be like that. So have you ever collaborated with anyone or been on a team before? I'm going to say this in your independent career. So I guess the past few years.
On games or?
What else? What else are you working on outside games?
Well, videos, I guess, which I suppose
Sure.
that, I do view those as pretty separate things for a lot of reasons, which we might get into later. Like, I kind of keep very separate, like, the work I do for YouTube and video stuff from a lot of my personal stuff. Like, they merge in some interesting kind of ways, but for the most part, they're very separate. Games I've collaborated with people on, but I've never really worked in a big team on anything like small, other than when I was employed at Reflections, obviously when I was working on AAA stuff. Then obviously I was working in teams. But in terms of like collaborations with other indie developers and stuff like that, I tend to, like, if I need to, I'll outsource artwork and the things I'm not good at. But I tend to get just those specific things from people rather than like really be intertwined with like a partner or something for like a really long-term project. I don't know why that is necessarily. That's just, the course of the projects that I've done always tended to be very solo pieces of work.
Right, yeah. I think that might be because you're kind of used to that, given the YouTube situation as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be really hard to just start collaborating because the availability on your site is probably very difficult to maintain when you're like, I'm running a channel, I have a Patreon, people need content. Oh, you need my attention right now?
yeah, that as well. And I'm not adverse to working in teams and stuff. Like, I love doing that kind of thing. I just, I don't get the opportunity a lot, and I don't seek it out a lot, I guess, because I'm a busy guy.
Yeah. Actually, and with that, I have another question based on that. I'm not going to say one specific, but there's a lot of people that I'm going to say once they're in a comfortable position, as you've mentioned, you're lucky enough to be there. They let go to their head. Do you have a method for staying grounded? Because you're a very humble person, and obviously you're in a position where you could be very arrogant all the time, and no one would second guess you, but you're not. Do you do this intentionally, or are you just naturally just very humble?
I don't know. Like, that's a really hard question to answer, because it's like, maybe my natural, it must be something natural in me, because my first thoughts to answer that are like, if I'm starting to tell all these people how I'm able to stay humble, I can't do that. How arrogant would that be of me? Right. So I don't know. Maybe that's something that's kind of just built into me. That's just kind of how I am in a way. I don't know. Like, I don't like seeing that kind of thing from people. It's not I don't value arrogance.
Well, hopefully, yeah.
yeah, well, exactly, right? And I don't know if I can tell you where having an ability to recognize that kind of thing would come from. It's not something I've really necessarily sat and introspected on for a really long time and thought about, like, why am I so humble? Like, I don't know, like, because I don't think I mean, nice of you to say, but I don't necessarily think I'm the most humble person in the universe. I'm very proud of the things that I've done, but I also think that, like, I suppose I've done a lot of thinking, and I've talked about before, like, feelings of imposter syndrome and those kind of things.
Right, it's hard to see how many, when you have so many people following you, it's so hard to really consider, like, wow, all these people, whoa, that is a lot of people.
And your brain filters out that kind of thing, I think, as well.
Yeah,
like,
it seems unrealistic, yeah.
Have you felt imposter syndrome with your YouTube following, for example?
Oh yeah, all the time. And a big thing that like pumps that up is sometimes just when I come like here to this like Discord, and I'm like asking other people on here for help with my stuff, and I'm just like, oh no, everyone's gonna see that I don't know anything about GameMaker. Like, they're gonna work out that like I don't actually know what I'm doing with code. Why is this guy doing tutorial videos? He doesn't even know this. That stuff runs through my head, and I think just maybe those tendencies tend to, maybe that sort of self-deception in a way, like, keeps me grounded in a really backwards, horrible way. I don't know.
Lack of confidence, that's the trick.
It's a really tough question to answer, because I think only someone else observing me could answer that properly in a way. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer that question about myself, if that sounds correct.
You're in the box. It's hard. You can't look into the box from within the box. Yeah.
I actually have a question that I want to ask. I know I said I wasn't going to talk much, but if there's one thing I'm really bad at, it's not talking. So One thing that I'm really interested to hear about, because I know it's a topic I've heard you talk about before, and it's something that's really important to me as well, is people talking about the differences between motivation and discipline. For me personally, I've always been a person that has struggled to do work that I don't necessarily care about a lot. Not even the topic as a whole, but the specific instance. If it's not interesting to me, it's something I struggle with. And I know you've spoken before about that you've had a kind of a whole personal journey about teaching yourself discipline and learning to listen to yourself, almost in a way of where you tell yourself you're going to do something, but then you actually have to follow through and prove that to yourself. So has that actually been something that has been something that you have had to work on? And if so, what were your steps to try to improve your own personal discipline?
First of all, I love that you talk about it in this, like, in the past sense kind of thing, as if I have surpassed it. That makes me feel good, because it's like, oh yeah, you're looking at me. I must look really disciplined and motivated to these guys. That's really cool. But as I say, the way I would define it as something I am working on, and it is something I am improving about myself constantly. And yeah, I have talked about this a lot in the past, because a lot of my success and a lot of the stuff I've done really well at has been driven 100% by just being really motivated and finding it really interesting and just really enjoying the stuff that I'm doing. Perspective, when I first made that, it was my final year project, but it was like, I was, like, our final year projects, like, they kind of had to, like, be purpose built. You had to have like this idea of a client, and why you were making the thing for that person, and so on and so forth. And I just found a way to word it all right that I could just be like, yeah, I'm making a video game because I wanted to make a game for it, And I've been doing stuff for so long. And Another Perspective and stuff was the thing with Another Perspective is it's a really short game. Like, you can finish it in like half an hour to an hour. Yeah, right. And yeah. The thing with that is that's probably why it got done. That's probably why I managed to finish it. Because
scope. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I maintained scope at such a low degree that motivation was able to actually drive the entire project. Like, I really never hit a point of like the work ever really being hard. Everyone says, oh, the last 10% of it was game development is 90% of the work and it's really hard kind of thing. But the project was so small that it wasn't, and I was just really driven like the whole way through it. And that's been great when that works, but the problem is that it has a ceiling, that kind of drive to be able to do stuff. Luckily, like, because it's a blessing and a curse in that, like, I've been really lucky to be so motivated and so naturally driven to do certain things, and to like start making YouTube videos because it's fun, and start making video games because it's fun, and do this because I'm enjoying it, because it doesn't feel like work, and that's great, and that's a blessing, and I'm able to put stuff out and build things, and reap the rewards of it without really, in my opinion, sort of really having done hard work. I kind of go back and forth on this, like, because it is hard work, and I have to remind myself that yes, I did hard work. Because I think this is a big part of what founds that layer of like imposter syndrome, is this belief that like I don't really work hard on anything. I just find it fun,
Right.
But the wall I hit with that then is not being able to do stuff just the very moment it starts to get a little bit difficult. The moment I run into something where I'm just like, this isn't fun, and but this new project I'm thinking of is really fun. And I think that's the root of that age-old problem with game developers, where it's just like you've always got a new project that you want to work on because it's fun in your head. Like, the starting of it, that's the really fun, cool bit, and the working out how you're going to structure the data for this project save file or whatever is not fun or interesting to you. And so being able to do that stuff is really, really hard. And the thing is, I don't have good advice for how to do it, other than kind of some of the experiences I've had that have just brought me to understand that this was the problem in the first place. I think an example I've given before is when I started running for the first time. A few years ago, like, I did Couch to 5K, and like I've always been a bit of a gremlin health-wise, I'm not a pretty classic, stereotypical, really skinny, nerdy guy, and like really out of shape. And I was able to do that, and there was something in it, and I think it just because it being this physical activity as well, of just it really driving home this point of feeling like I really want to stop when I'm running, and I really don't want to do it anymore, and being able to think that, oh, this is it. This is the thing that's been stopping some of my work from ever really being really, really good. And it has been this whole time. Like, before I made games, I was I did a lot of Flash animation. I have a few things on like Newgrounds and stuff like that, and I was really getting into Flash and doing that stuff in kind of way. And eventually I just dropped it because it was just like getting better was at this plateau, and I couldn't be bothered to climb that next wall of getting better at that thing. Mm-hmm. And I run into that with so many hobbies and skills and stuff where I'm just so driven and so passionate, and I do loads and loads of stuff, and then I just hit this wall, and then I stop getting better and I move on. And the key to getting better at that sort of stuff is being able to do work even when it's not fun. And that's really hard because you don't know if it's going to be worth it or not. You've just got to trust that it's going to be worth it. And it's really tough because you can quite legitimately argue to yourself, like, if it's not fun, why am I doing it? If I'm not really passionate about this, shouldn't I be really passionate about this? You know, should I then be doing something else? And everyone's got to kind of make that decision for themselves, really, of if they really, really want the thing they're going after. And sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll think about it and think, you know, actually, I don't really want the thing that I would get out of doing all this really hard work. That's one of the reasons I left Ubisoft Reflections in the first place when I was a game designer there. I eventually came to the realization that working in that industry, in AAA games as a designer, was going nowhere that I wanted to go. Like, if I worked really, really hard and I became a senior designer or I became a lead designer, the things that would mean for me, I realized weren't really what I wanted. And that's one of the reasons I walked away from that.
So along the lines of this, do you have like a support group? And I mean this obviously in a very broad sense, you know, is Patreon, having those people, does that make you feel better about motivation? Like knowing there's people there that are like readily awaiting your content, not like in an angry way, but we're excited to see what you do next. Does that help you push through those plateaus?
It can do, yeah. But the thing is that anything that helps you with that kind of stuff, like, this is the really key thing, is that I don't think anything can help you with... I don't think there are any tricks to helping you with discipline. I don't think there are any number of YouTube videos you can watch, or TED Talks you can watch, or books you can read, or anything that can teach you, do these things or these trips and follow these tips and tricks, and you'll be able to be more disciplined and, you know, able to accomplish things you couldn't before. I don't think any of that works. The reason is because I think any of those things, all they do is make you more motivated. So yeah, that stuff helps with having like people on Patreon who are really excited about the stuff that I do. It's really cool, and it motivates you because you're infused with the fun of doing your thing again. You know, you feel excited for the thing to come out, and you're able to do the stuff without it feeling like work again. But the problem with that is you're doing it without it feeling like work again, and you're not building that ability to do things even when they are hard work. And so the only way to build discipline is to be able to do things that you hate doing. You've got to do it even though you're not enjoying it. You've got to do a thing even though everything else in you and in your brain is telling you to not do it. And it's a dangerous power, and it's a very dangerous power, because if you're too good at that, you can burn yourself out and you can do things that are bad for you.
I was going to ask, because, you know, oftentimes, and I'm sure you see this too, is I see a lot of people who are like brand new to game development. I'd still consider myself in that category, and I still struggle with this, is the question of like, how do you stay motivated? And that's a question I asked a lot early on too, and my answer now is similar. It's like, you need to, I've always phrased it as like, you have a relationship with yourself. You're not like a single person. Like, you have a relationship of trust with yourself, that when you tell yourself you're going to do something, you know, you're not sure if you're actually going to do it, and you need to build that level of trust that when you say you're going to do something, you actually do it. But the tricky thing for me, and where I struggle to keep giving this advice or even think about it for myself, is how do I know draw the line of when I need to push myself, or when I need to recognize that I might be going too far and I need to avoid burning out? And like, where do I draw that line in the sand of keep pushing yourself, or maybe it's not healthy, maybe my body's telling me something, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a really great question to think about, and I think the answer is that you've just got to be really honest with yourself, and you've got to really realize that you don't have to fear motivation. Like, you don't have to think that, you know, like, oh, and this is something I was talking about, where I was thinking, like, oh, if I'm really motivated to do something, that I'm not really doing hard work. Of course I am. Of course the things I'm doing are still meaningful and are still hard work and are still things I should be really proud of, just because I found them fun and I didn't necessarily feel like it was super hard work, you know? So if you're motivated, it's great. It's just, there's always going to be that wall you hit where you're not motivated anymore, and if you really want the end result, you've got to be able to push past that to some degree. And yeah, the problem is always, where do you draw that line? When are you working too hard? But I think if you're really honest with yourself, you know when you're working hard, you know? And I think you can do that without, I think the key is to drop comparisons to, like, everyone, because it's a really hard thing to do, because it's how we found all understanding of anything, right? Is to be able to compare things to other things. But like, you've got to kind of drop out those comparisons and just ask yourself, and ask, you know, if you're stressed out by a thing, do you need to take a break? Take the break, you know? If you could be working harder, I think you know that you could be working harder. It's a really tough one, because you can find yourself in all kinds of places where you're lying to yourself and you're not really thinking about it properly, and like, you think you're not working hard but you are, or you think you're working really hard and you could maybe actually be working harder, and it's tough, and you just got to really be honest with yourself and really reflect on you and what matters to you, you know, what's more important to you. Like, in a way, you are balancing, like, how much stress and how much work you're willing to put up with, and what outcomes you want from the things you create. Why are you creating this thing in the first place? Is it really important to you that you finish this, or is it really important to you that this thing reaches X level of quality, you know? Is it really important to you that you don't feel tired or stressed ever, you know? Like,
I really want to touch on that. That's a really good point you made, not comparing. I've worked with a number of people, and it's interesting because some days I would be told, wow, man, you're working really hard. And I'm like, no, what? I haven't done anything. I'm a waste of space. And then on the other hand, I'll be like, no, but you worked like 6 hours. That's brutal. And they're like, no, I haven't done anything. And it's funny because if you compare both sides are unhappy with themselves. But the other side is, no, you worked hard. And so, yeah, you're right. You can't make comparisons. You really have to look at yourself and go, am I happy with what I've done today?
Exactly.
Do I feel good about what I've done?
Yeah, and you've got to ask yourself, just, again, it's just comparing, it essentially risk-reward, right? It's just like, how much do I want the outcome of this versus, you know, what am I prepared to put up with to get it, you know? And you've just got to answer that question really honestly and think about the consequences of it, because there are consequences one way or the other.
Totally.
We have quite a lot of questions from both people in the chat right now and from Twitter, so I'm going to go through some of them. The first one's actually really interesting. It comes from Sandbox in the chat right now, and he says, question for Shaun. Most of the people in the chat that I know and yourself are men. As a whole, sexism in the STEM field is well known, but in the GM community, the male-to-female imbalance seems particularly pronounced. Outside of one or two examples, I can't think of any major female GMS users. What do you think is the problem in the community, and what do you think there is a solution to this problem? And real quick, before we go in further, Amusuden pointed out right below that I don't think it's a problem with the community, but more so programming and game dev in general being posed as something men do. I think it's a really interesting question. I myself don't know if I could sum up as to one clear, this is why and this is how we fix it, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the subject.
No, yeah, I kind of have the same reaction of like, right. This is a huge thing.
Huge subject.
Yeah, and you liken it to, you know, more a thing for game development and software development in general. It's beyond that, man. You're talking about society and culture,
right?
At this point in general, it's a huge thing, and and just as you say, I definitely wouldn't be able to root out what I think is the number one problem or the number one solution to that problem. There's a million and one things. But the key thing, I think, and something that's highlighted here, is the irony of asking a man this question, right? like, this panel of men, how do we solve this problem of, you know, there's not enough women in here? Well, maybe let's ask some women this question. So here's something I think we could do. Okay, here's something I think we could do as a simple thing. You know, the next person you should have on this show should be exactly friendly cosmonaut. Yeah. Right? Right? There you go. There's one thing we can do. Like, that's a really cool that's someone who's, you know, that's a female who is represent who can represent her gender and is and so on. And it's really cool that, like, I'm so glad that she just exists. right, as someone doing video stuff. Like, so I think I saw someone talking a while ago about just like tutorial stuff in general outside of even GameMaker. Like, you don't and video stuff in general, big YouTubers, other than, like, you know, personality and lifestyle stuff in technical fields like this, the way we're talking about these problems existing, you don't see a lot of representation of women doing this kind of thing. So I think that's something, you know, signal boosting the people who do those kind of things and bringing them to the front to show other women who might be interested in this sort of stuff that it's a valid thing for them, you know, that they have a place in this industry and they have a place in the stuff that we do is a good part of that.
Right.
Yeah. I think there's a weird perspective on this I started to gather lately. I'm starting to see a lot more female developers on Twitter, but the only time I see them is when they're calling out guys for calling out women. It's really weird because that's the only time I see them, but I've seen so many at this point. I'm like, there's like at least 100+ women that work in Unity on like a daily basis and like do freelance like exactly like we do. What?
I feel like it's even like a step further, is that at first, like, that was my perspective too, but as I look into it more, it's like the whole, I don't know, I feel like there's a whole category of people who complain about women complaining about sexism, which is just so backwards in my head, but it almost gets to the point, I mean, like, you know, if you go out there and you do make an effort to find female developers or artists or whatever, and you fill your feed with them, you just see, I mean, it's just artists in the same capacity, but then these whole big Twitter moments get blown up, and it's just, it illuminates these smaller but loud voices that exist.
So that's, I say, it's a very small thing, but I think that's the easiest thing we can do is to signal boost the people who do, you know, signal boost women who do this kind of stuff so that women have better representation across the board in the kind of things that we do. But also, you know, you say you only see these women when these big Twitter posts blow up about stuff or whatever. But one of the things you can do if you're not seeing much of that stuff is just go and follow some of these women. Yeah, right. just find female developers, follow them, and listen to them. Listen to what they're saying. Listen to what their problems are, because they're the ones who know what the problems are better than any of us do, and they can tell us what the problems are.
Yeah, I've actually I've spent a good amount of time like trying to curate my own timeline of who I'm following. Like, I do make like a conscious effort when I'm bored to try to find interesting people to follow. It's not that I just like follow as I see them, and I'm like really happy with my Twitter. Like, if I were to lose my Twitter right now, I'd be really upset just because of the list of people I follow, because I feel like my idea or what I see of game dev now is this super inclusive and progressive community with so many different voices is just what I see, and I find it a lot more interesting to see. And, you know, obviously I am of the majority category, but hearing multiple voices and seeing different people actually makes game dev more exciting for me when I see it in my own Twitter feed. And it did take a bit of a conscious effort to try to build it that way, which is, you know, that's something to talk about in itself of how difficult it was to find them, but just having them makes it, for me personally, more exciting, and I enjoy it more.
Yeah.
Actually, another interesting thing that Captain Austin pointed out in the chat is that it'd be really cool to see GameMaker being incorporated more in the computing and IT curriculum. And Shaun, if I'm not mistaken, you actually have helped teach people in a school GameMaker. Am I remembering that right?
I've done little things like that from time to time, yes. Yeah. I've gone and worked at the Teesside University where I've been. Did workshops a few times, and I've gone to a couple of colleges and schools and things like that where they brought me in just as a sort of expert for the day kind of thing.
Right.
Where I've given specific help with projects and things like that.
They actually do that a lot in the UK, it turns out. I have a friend in college and they're teaching them GameMaker. It's actually really big there for some reason.
Have you found that people are more excited about the prospect of learning to code when it's put in context of something like games? Because I took a few general computer science classes when I was in high school, and it was horribly mundane and boring, and nobody enjoyed it. The only people that enjoyed it were people that already enjoyed programming for whatever reason. Was it your observation that people seemed to be more excited about the prospect? Or was the class that you had, they were already people for that field specifically?
Maybe. I mean, it's varied from the different contexts in which I've shown people this kind of stuff.
Right.
But in some of the schools, you generally get like a few people who are really jazzed and excited about the idea of making stuff and making games, and also a category of people who couldn't care less and they just, they want to get their project done because that's what their class is telling them to do, It's difficult for me to then say which of those people who are really excited are only excited because it's games versus like people who just really are into programming, and whether or not that's bringing in people into programming who otherwise maybe wouldn't be interested. So I don't think it's fair for me to say one way or the other whether that it makes sense that would be a thing, but I couldn't tell you to what kind of extent that would affect people.
Right. Okay, so we have another question here. This one does come from the chat again, from Lotes. The question is, what got you to begin helping people with GameMaker on YouTube? What was it that first made you make that first tutorial video? And I'm actually curious, what was that first tutorial video? Because I'm not aware of what it was.
The first tutorial video was not a tutorial video. It was a video that was an introduction to the idea of me making tutorial videos. It was episode 0, and I watched it every now and again, and it's just like my mic quality was awful, and it was amazing. But yeah, it was just a video where I was like, hey, I'm going to be making GameMaker tutorial videos. What topics would you like to see covered? Blah, 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 blah. Let me know in the comments. And that then led to my several-year career of people constantly telling me in comments what tutorial video they would like to see next. Yeah, that was the first thing I did. So, sorry, what was the question? It was like, how did I...
Yeah, so what was the motivation to begin making those videos to help people?
Sure. It was effectively... was it Perspective 1? Yeah, it was Perspective 1, not Another Perspective, but the game I made before that. I made that game at a time when nobody else at my university made a game for their final year project, right? And I'm talking about loads of people on courses for game design,
Right.
Applying to studios and so on with CVs that contain things like GDDs, big game design documents, and game bibles and that kind of thing. As evidence that they knew what they were talking about when it came to game design. And I was the only person who had a finished game by the end of that thing that they could show off to employers at that university. And there was a final year project showcase which had an award sponsored for it by Ubisoft Reflections in video game and level design, I think it was. And I won it basically completely uncontested because like the things other people were showing were not a finished game, like I had this like finished game that I could just literally say, here's my thing, and they would play it. And like especially back then when I was like fresh almost out of university kind of thing, like I was a pretty like socially awkward guy. I'm not very good in like interview context and that kind of thing.
Was this before or after it was on Steam when you showed it in class?
Oh, this is way before Steam.
Oh, okay.
Perspective 1 never went to Steam. It's a rubbish game, really. By comparison, at least to Another Perspective, like it's so slow. Like there's like a
bad
10-second transition between 10-second transition between each level. It's just really bad.
Yeah, but you did it. I mean,
yeah, exactly, right. And I made this thing, and you could move around in it, and like the controls felt nice enough to this guy who was just blown away by the fact that someone had made a game. Like, and that in itself was like gold dust to them, and they were just like, yeah, you've won this thing. And then I won an internship at Ubisoft Reflection, which led to from there was like my whole career, right? Just like starting from that point. And because of that, I was kind of blown away just by that notion that just by doing this thing and just by getting out there and making things, I'd been able to accomplish what I had. And so I wanted to bring that to other people. Like I wanted to show other people, like, hey, just get started making things. Look, there's this tool that was kind of like a secret weapon, right? Like you just like all these people like studying like game design and stuff. Back then, like Unity wasn't a big thing or whatever, so the idea of just making your own game was actually kind of a really rare, unthought of thing, like if you weren't a programmer or something like that, right? So I wanted to show people that, like, yo, you could just go out today, get this software, it costs like $20 or whatever. It doesn't anymore. But it costed like $20, and you could get it, and you can make your own thing, and you can show people that that you know what you're talking about when it comes to game design, because there's no better way to demonstrate it. And that was my main thing for getting started with it.
So a question from the Discord, and this is a really good one. It's like I'm really curious about. I'm gonna add a little more to the question. First is, how young were you when you got into programming / game design? But also, what initially gave you the kick to do that? I mean, was it like I googled GameMaker and GameMaker came up, or?
No, actually, I don't think I ever had that moment. I know that's on most people's like discovery of GameMaker. But my sort of story with tools starts with a thing called Click and Play.
Not Click Team Fusion, different.
No, but it's what became Multimedia Fusion, and I think now Click Team Fusion. It's like the
Gotcha.
oldest version of it. It was called Click and Play.
This is a GameMaker 5 version of it. Gotcha.
Yeah, right. And so it was this really ancient tool, and it was all drag and drop logic. There was no coding in it or anything like that. But it let you make your own like 2D games. You make side scroll things and stuff like that in it. And I was attracted to that because I always used to love level editors and stuff. You could sell any game to me when I was really young, like we're talking like 12, 13-ish or whatever, just by saying like, probably younger than that actually. I don't even remember when I got Click and Play. I must have been really young. But you could sell any game to me by saying, oh, this comes with a level editor, or whatever. It comes with a thing. It comes with some way to create things. Because that's ultimately, after a lot of introspection I've done, the main thing I love doing is not necessarily about games, but just about creating stuff. I just love making things and putting it in front of people. So the idea of making levels and stuff was amazing, and then the idea of making games was amazing, because I love games and I love making things. You put those two things together, oh my god, boom. And so I loved this Click and Play thing, and I got into that, and that taught me, like, without really realizing it, taught me a lot of like basic logic and stuff for making games, and just how computers work and that kind of thing. Then led to a thing called Dark Basic. Yeah, so some of you might know about that. If you don't, you can Google it. I'm not going to talk too much about it. But like, the only reason I discovered it was
we have a fan for Dark Basic in the chat.
I was in like PC World, I think, the shop, with my mom, and I saw this thing that was just like 3D game creator or whatever, and it was just like a copy of Dark Basic, but it just had like make your own games or something just on the front of the box. And I was just like, Mom, I need this thing! And then she got me that, and that taught me my first sort of bit of like actual programming, you know? And then I learned that, and that, again, that was before I ever did any programming and like computing lessons in school or anything like that. But when eventually it came around to it, and it was like, okay, we're going to learn Visual Basic in school, I was proper hype, because like, it's like, oh, it's like Dark Basic, and I could do gamey stuff in it and so on, and I really loved it. And then I had a weird flashback when I went to university of when I was younger, watching my brother, who also wanted to get into games, and he's like we've loved games together growing up, and he's 10 years older than me. And when I was really, I don't know, I was quite a lot younger, he was playing around with GameMaker. I don't think he used it for very long, but maybe he is probably the one who had that moment where he googled game making and found GameMaker. And I was like, oh, what are you doing? I was like, oh, I'm using this tool called GameMaker, and that's all there was for it. And that name stuck in my head. I didn't then go away and look it up on Google and download it myself, but then like 10 years later, for some reason I just had that memory. It was like, oh, my brother was using that thing called GameMaker, and when I was at university, so I looked it up, got it, and it was like version 8.1, I think, at the time, and that's where I used to make Perspective, and then it all just kind of went from there.
You can't deny that it's a great search engine optimization.
Yeah. But I've always been into tools. That's the thing. I've always I used a lot of RPG Maker and all those kind of things. I've always used these kind of like game develop. To be really unfair and pejorative, the game development tools for babies kind of thing. I've always loved that kind of. I've always loved the tools that were there. It's just like, oh, make your own RPG. I'd be sold right away by all that kind of marketing of those kind of things, and I would just dive into those tools. And I've always just loved those things and those communities and stuff like that.
You guys remember KidPix?
Oh my god, I love KidPix.
Yeah.
I don't know that one.
Yes,
that thing.
It was
that
like
thing linked in the chat.
Microsoft
that was it.
Paint with a billion bells and whistles. And when I was in elementary school, we had like an entire portion of the day where our technology, like education, was just messing around on this weird, wacky Microsoft Paint clone. But it had so many things in it. Oh man, I love KidPix. Could talk about that all day, but we still have a ton of questions. We're running a bit short on time, so I'm going to ask one more question from the Discord, then try to get a few in from Twitter. The last one we'll take from the Discord is from Runo, which is, I'm curious to hear Shaun's opinion on streaming development on Twitch and YouTube and its benefits and downsides.
So we're talking about, like, you're working on a personal project and streaming the footage of you doing that.
Right, yeah. No, especially because you stream a lot of your jam work, so do you think that helps your motivation? Does it distract you?
I don't know what it would do for motivation, but in terms of like just the work, it's very different when you're working on stuff on stream to when you're not. In a way, it can be really helpful because it encourages that kind of game jam mindset sometimes, where you feel this sort of pressure to just be doing things and to be getting things done. To be productive, and that sometimes means you take pretty good approaches to things in terms of just getting the thing done and working and so on, without sitting there and optimizing it into the ground and then never actually writing a single line of code. And then that can be really cool, and I love sharing it with people and stuff. I love sharing just the development process, and I think it can be really cool as well as a marketing thing of just bringing people into the development of your game and getting people interested in it as it goes along. That's really cool as well, and it's really fun. The downsides of it are, as I say, there is that pressure, and sometimes, like, the thing with coding streams, right, is sometimes you can, I'd be watching them and it's just the guy staring into space, like not even writing anything, literally just staring into space, just trying to think of how to solve a problem or an issue. And sometimes obviously you get that thing with loads of people trying to solve the issue for you in the chat, but they don't really understand the issue, and you're just like, no, that's not the thing, that's not what I'm trying to do, and so on. And so it's wreathed with problems, and you can't do all of your game development in it. So it tends to be if I've got a specific thing I want to do, or if I just want to chill out for a bit and I'm not too concerned about like laying down some really serious like fundamental stuff for a project. So it varies on what I'm doing. I would never stream all of the development of like a long-term game project, but I do love doing stuff like jams. I was always really nervous the first time I streamed a jam thing of just like, am I going to be able to do this stuff and also stream it? How is that going to work? But it turned out to be really easy. Like I got really into it and I just really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to take one question from Twitter here, which comes from @EonLongnap. Definitely didn't say that right. What are some cool mechanics or concepts that you haven't seen implemented into a game that you'd like to see? Because I know that you're very design-oriented, and you studied specifically game design, right? That was what you mentioned because you were the only person in your class.
Technically, no, but basically, yes. That's kind of a long story that I could spend like 10-15 minutes talking about, so I won't go into that. Sure. But for the sake of argument, yes, I basically studied game design.
Okay, so, so what are some cool mechanics or concepts that you haven't seen in plenty of games that you would like to see more?
That's a really tough question, because everything that comes out at the moment is so good.
Right.
Like outside of just my own projects and things that I'm already working on that I think are really cool. Sometimes I see things. I suppose it's a more interesting question of things like I'm not able to work on myself that I think would be really cool. I have a lot of thoughts about fighting games and stuff, but to get into that would take hours. But here's one I was talking about on Twitter a little while ago, was like in survival games. For me, like, I have this weird dissonance with real-time timer bars for things like hunger, sleep, and stuff like that. And
constant anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. And I just feel like survival wouldn't really be like that. And there's the obvious dissonance of just like, oh, you die literally a minute after you first notice you're hungry. You know? Like, that's, and you become hungry like 15 minutes after you ate an entire rabbit or whatever, or you just ate like a massive meal, and like 15 minutes later you're starving. You know, there's that obviously, because that's video games, right? And that's how it'll be, and there's an obvious problem with just games and the time we play them and so on. But I always think it would be interesting to explore survival games with more downtime and more time spent not really doing much. Minecraft actually is a good one.
You're saying you like the peaceful atmosphere of, like, it's more about enjoying the moment and the serenity of it versus filling up bars constantly.
And that's the thing with those things, when you can see a bar and that you know that it's moving, there's that, I don't know, there's just a constant stress level to that to me. So I'd love to see more. They do exist, so I guess I'm not even answering the question, because this stuff does exist in some form. But like, how
do you feel about The Sims then? Because there's like 12 bars you have to fill.
Right.
So like Sims hard mode, there's no HUD.
You just gotta remember.
But an interesting tangent to this is sometimes I think maybe that's just because of how I think of games. Because something someone had said about completely different game. The
Starbound?
No, Stardew Valley, though. You helped me think of the name of it. Is that it's actually a really stressful game disguised as a stress-free game.
Oh my god, yeah.
You know, you're stressed when you start making timetables of all the, all the citizens.
But I've then spoken and heard the opinions of people who kind of have a counterpoint to this, of people, notably women, who have played this game, who actually find it really relaxing. My girlfriend finds it really relaxing, and I think it's because they played it in a different way, the way they talk about how they played it, and this is what they offered up as the counterpoint, is that they didn't care about all of the stressful stuff going on in it, because the game doesn't really have like a real goal. Yeah, you can finish the community center, yeah, you can start making loads of money, but those are goals we kind of end up setting for ourselves because we're so familiar with games, and that's how games work. Like, we got to make all the numbers really big, and we've got to make sure everything's really optimized, and do that kind of stuff, when really you can just decide to not care and just be like, yeah, I'm going to go to bed early tonight on the Stardew Valley game, or, you know, and I'm going, I'll do that thing tomorrow or whatever, and actually live the life that the game is trying, because the whole game is fundamentally meant to be about like going out to the country and like relaxing and that kind of thing.
It's like literally in the intro sequence, you're escaping your dreary life at a desk.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that just it's hard to tell whether like I want to see more of this kind of thing, of it being actually like properly stress-free and relaxing and encouraging that kind of thing, and I do, because I want it to encourage people like me to be able to see games that way. But I think there's a whole class of gamers out there who can already view games that way, because maybe they've not been massively inundated with this history of what games are and what games have to be in order to be fun, and they just don't care about that stuff in a way that the rest of us do, and the rest of us feel is vital. So it's a difficult one to tell either way, which is kind of tangential to the question. But
okay, I'll ask one more question from our audience. This comes from Twitter. It's a combination of questions from @DurJulian and @LoatsOats, who ask, how would you improve GameMaker? If you could change one thing about GMS2, what would it be?
Oh gosh. So I'm sure there's probably a really huge, cool answer I could give to this, but I'm just going to pick on something really small that just annoys me, and that would be the code regioning thing that's built into GameMaker. So like at the moment you build a code region just by doing like start hash region, you type a name in the thing, and end region, blah, blah, blah. At first I was like, oh cool, they put code folding in, but then it just ended up consuming so much like white space that I just never use it anymore, and it just looks ugly, and it's a pain to set up, and I just think it looks gross, so I don't like it. I wish it just did code folding how anything else does code folding, where it will recognize a block, put a nice subtle unintrusive like plus minus thing next to it, and you can click that, open it and close it, and be done with it. And even maybe have it in preferences, you can set what types of blocks you want it to appear on, and all that kind of thing. And I asked about this when I worked at YoYo Games, and I was just like, why are we doing it this way? Why aren't we doing it in the way that I just described? And the reason was like, there's feedback that exists out there that people don't like it that way. People think that the pluses and minuses are really obtrusive or whatever, or they really get in your way. And I think it was like it might have been Jobo, who worked because he did Parakeet and got feedback on that. But people, a lot of people didn't really like the code folding and stuff in it. And
I didn't like it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's stressful because in GameMaker you have like 6 ifs, so you expand the first one, and then you have to expand the next one, and then you have to expand. And then when you go to fold it all up, you're like, I didn't close every box. I can't just close the top fold.
So then I think the theory was, okay, we'll put in this hash region thing, and then you get to specifically choose where it is. But I'm just thinking, why couldn't that have just been a preference? You know, why couldn't that have just been a preference that you go in and you just be like, okay, I want them to appear on these blocks, I want them to appear on this one, and I want them to automatically open when I do this, and so on, and have it customizable in that way that it makes it comfortable to you, or just turn them off altogether in the preferences.
It'd be cool if they're like breakpoints. You could like click on the side. They weren't like actually taking up white space.
That's how a lot of code editors work. Yeah.
That's how I would see them as being, and how I would see them as being in our right, and exactly, and the way it is in Yellow Afterlights is really good. So that's just a personal tiny thing for me that I would love to see. I would love to see proper folding, but I don't know if it'll ever happen, because I think they've just kind of made their minds up on that, and that's how they like it. But I think a lot of other people really like it. I think a lot of people like just being able to just define, here's a region and here's not a region. But I used them for a while because I really liked the idea of it, and now I just find them a mess, and I hate unfolding them and seeing and naming the code regions and so on. I just find they just consume so many lines, and I don't know. I just think they look really ugly. It's just putting in more blocks in order to hide blocks, and just I didn't like it.
All right. I'm going to pass it over to Maseda to ask our last but very most important question. Maseda?
Yeah, so we always ask this question, and I think it's something that's dear to all of our hearts. It's something that every game developer does. What's your favorite food?
Gosh, I like a lot of food.
It's like the
That
hardest
is the hardest question. There have been a lot of hard questions that I struggle to answer, but I think what's my favorite food might be the most difficult question to answer.
As a self-declared gremlin,
Favorite food. Ah,
bread
man, that's put me on the spot more than anything I could possibly imagine.
Yeah, I know. We should have warned you about that one.
At the moment, I've got just like traditional British chips stuck in my head, just because I've had a lot of them recently.
What kind of chips do you like?
Oh, right, so like British, so I'm talking about like fries, right? So like potatoes, cut them into, yeah.
Like pub wedges? Or
yeah, so like big chunky
skinny
ones with like, and fake vinegar is the very important part of this. Yeah.
We're talking about French fries, by the way.
It has to have fake
UK.
vinegar, and what I mean by that is it has to have brewed condiment is, I believe, the real name of it.
Like tangy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it like comes in
With
usually,
the
right?
stuff that you get at like a fish and chip shop because it's cheaper for them to produce, and I'm just like, why don't they just use this everywhere? It tastes better, or it does on chips, where like instead of like vinegar being like malted barley and all that stuff, it's literally just acetic acid, and it tastes amazing. So, fake vinegar.
Okay, great. All right, so before we head off, Shaun, is there anything that you want to plug?
I don't know, not really. It's difficult for me to plug Pokepoke because it doesn't even have like a landing page or anything at the moment, but you can follow #Pokepoke if you want to follow along with that game and so on. I don't know.
Go follow Shaun on Twitter.
Go follow other people on. Here's who I'll plug, because we were talking about it earlier. Go follow Friendly Cosmonaut on Twitter. Go follow her on YouTube. I've got enough subscribers. I'm doing fine. I've got a great Patreon base. There's a lot of people who are making really, really cool stuff. Also, Pixelated Pope. Go follow him. Go follow his YouTube stuff. There's loads of people doing really, really great work who are not able to do this stuff like full time, or are not able, who don't have the resources to necessarily put out like loads and loads of stuff, and who aren't supported entirely by it. And it would be great if they could be one day. So go follow those people. That's who I'll plug.
Dang it, Shaun, you're so humble.
What a guy. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Shaun, it was a pleasure having you on. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to offer special thanks to Gartman for composing our podcast jingle, Tony Stir for designing our website, and the GameMaker community as a whole for their support and for tuning in. We'll catch you all in the next episode. Woo!
Yeah, sorry about the weird audio quality halfway through. I got kicked out of my shed. So I went to work to not get disturbed, and earlier we did a little test. The workplace is too echoey, so I went inside a shed, and we have these sheds in our office. And that was fine until like the cleaner showed up, and I didn't realize the cleaner came on at this time, and so she kicked me out because she was vacuuming. And so I had to find a place, and the only place I found was in the kitchen, and that was the echoey place. So I said, fuck that, I'm going to the car. So I'm sitting in my car right now on cellular connection. I have my laptop open, and it seems to be okay.